Welcome. Today, we're beginning a journey through one of the most fascinating explorations of human behavior ever written, The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. This isn't simply a book about psychology. It's about learning to recognize the hidden forces that quietly influence every decision we make, every relationship we build, and every mistake we repeat. The more you understand human nature, the better you understand yourself. And once you understand yourself, you begin to see the world with remarkable clarity. Let's begin with the very first law, the law of irrationality. Most of us like to believe we're rational people. We imagine that we carefully weigh our options, examine the facts, and make thoughtful decisions. We trust our ability to think logically and assume that reason guides our actions. But reality tells a different story. Have you ever reacted in a way that surprised even you? Maybe you said something in anger that you instantly regretted. Maybe you made an expensive purchase you didn't really need. Perhaps you walked away from an incredible opportunity simply because fear whispered that you weren't ready. If you've experienced moments like these, you're not alone. The truth is, our emotions often take control long before our logical mind has a chance to speak. We may believe we're making objective decisions, but beneath the surface, emotions quietly shape our thoughts, influence our perceptions, and steer our actions without us realizing it. According to Robert Greene, this is one of the defining characteristics of human nature. We're not purely rational creatures. We're emotional beings who constantly convince ourselves that our emotional decisions are logical ones. That realization may sound uncomfortable, but it's actually incredibly empowering. Because once you recognize this hidden influence, you gain the ability to pause, observe, and respond more wisely instead of reacting automatically. Think back to a disagreement you've had with someone close to you. In the middle of the conversation, everything they said felt like an attack. Every word seemed personal. Defending yourself felt completely justified. But hours later, or perhaps the next morning, you looked back and realized the situation wasn't nearly as serious as it seemed. Nothing around you had changed. Only your emotional state had. This is exactly how irrationality works. It quietly changes the lens through which we see reality. When we're angry, everything appears offensive. When we're afraid, every opportunity seems dangerous. When we're overly excited, every risk feels worth taking. Our emotions don't simply influence our decisions. They influence the reality we believe we're seeing. This doesn't mean emotions are the enemy. In fact, emotions are essential. They allow us to love deeply. They motivate us to protect the people we care about. They inspire courage, creativity, compassion, and meaningful change. Without emotions, life would lose much of its richness. The problem isn't emotion itself. The problem begins when emotion takes complete control while convincing us we're being perfectly logical. That's when we make choices we'll later struggle to explain. Greene encourages us to develop something many people never practice: awareness. Awareness creates distance between emotion and action. Instead of immediately reacting, we begin observing ourselves. We notice when frustration is rising. We recognize when pride is speaking louder than reason. We become aware of fear disguising itself as caution. That small moment of awareness can completely change the outcome of a decision. Imagine receiving a harsh email at work. Your first instinct may be to fire back an equally harsh response. It feels justified. It feels necessary. But if you pause for even a few minutes, something interesting happens. The emotional intensity begins to fade. Suddenly, you notice details you completely missed before. You realize the other person may have been stressed. You recognize that your response could damage a relationship that really matters. What felt urgent no longer feels necessary. That pause protects you from making an emotional decision you'll later regret. One of the simplest questions you can ask yourself is this: am I responding to the situation or to the emotion I'm feeling right now? That single question interrupts the emotional autopilot most people live on every day. Another powerful habit is seeking another perspective. When emotions become intense, our thinking naturally becomes narrow. We only see one interpretation, one conclusion, one solution, but someone outside the situation often sees what we cannot. A trusted friend, mentor, or colleague may notice emotional blind spots that remain invisible to us. This isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom. Some of history's greatest leaders surrounded themselves with people willing to challenge their thinking, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they understood that every human mind has emotional blind spots. Greene reminds us that mastering irrationality doesn't require becoming emotionless. It requires learning to work with our emotions instead of becoming controlled by them. When emotion and reason begin working together, better decisions naturally follow. Relationships improve. Conflicts become easier to resolve. Long-term thinking replaces impulsive reactions. Over time, this becomes a habit. Instead of allowing every emotion to dictate your next move, you begin responding with intention. You become less reactive, more patient, more observant, and ultimately more effective. The law of irrationality isn't teaching us to reject our emotions. It's teaching us to understand them. Because the better we understand the emotional forces operating inside us, the less power they have over our lives. The next time you're about to make a quick decision, pause. Take one deep breath. Ask yourself what's truly driving your choice. You may discover that what feels logical in the moment is simply an emotion asking to be heard. And sometimes, that brief moment of awareness is all it takes to completely change the direction of your life. If you're enjoying this summary so far and finding it valuable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us create more in-depth book summaries like this one. Now, let's continue with the next law. Chapter 2, the Law of Narcissism. Now that we've uncovered the hidden influence of our emotions, we move to another powerful force shaping nearly every human interaction, the Law of Narcissism. The word narcissism often brings to mind someone who is arrogant, self-absorbed, or constantly seeking attention. But Robert Greene challenges that narrow definition. According to Greene, every single one of us possesses some degree of narcissism. The real question isn't whether you're narcissistic. The question is, how much? At its healthiest level, narcissism gives us confidence. It allows us to believe in ourselves, pursue our ambitions, and recover from failure. Without a healthy sense of self-worth, we'd struggle to take risks or chase meaningful goals. But when that self-focus grows too strong, it begins to distort reality. Instead of understanding others, we become consumed by ourselves. Instead of listening, we wait for our turn to speak. Instead of building relationships, we begin treating people as mirrors, reflecting back the image we desperately want to see. This is where problems begin. Greene explains that the roots of narcissism are usually planted very early in life. A child who grows up receiving little affection or emotional validation often develops an intense need for approval later in adulthood. On the other hand, a child who is constantly praised without limits may grow up believing they deserve admiration simply for existing. Different childhood experiences, the same destination, an unhealthy obsession with the self. One of Greene's most fascinating ideas is something he calls the mirror effect. Many people aren't truly interested in others. They're interested in how others make them feel about themselves. Think about someone who constantly checks how people react whenever they speak. They watch facial expressions. They measure compliments. They remember criticism far longer than kindness. Their attention isn't really focused outward. It's fixed inward. They're searching for confirmation that they're important, admired, respected, or superior. This constant need for validation quietly controls many people's behavior. Some become charming simply to receive admiration. Others become controlling because criticism feels unbearable. Some manipulate emotions to keep attention centered on themselves. The methods differ. The motivation stays the same. Greene also reminds us that narcissists don't all look alike. Some are loud. Some are incredibly quiet. Some dominate every conversation. Others play the victim to gain sympathy. One person demands attention through confidence. Another gains attention through suffering. Different personalities, the same underlying need: recognition, validation, importance. One of the healthiest forms Greene describes is the healthy narcissist. This person possesses confidence without arrogance. They believe in themselves while remaining capable of empathy. They don't need constant praise because their self-worth comes from within rather than from the opinions of others. This balance is rare, but it's worth developing. So how do you recognize unhealthy narcissism? Pay attention to patterns. Does someone constantly redirect every conversation back to themselves? Do they struggle to admit mistakes? Are they unusually sensitive to criticism? Do they expect special treatment while showing little concern for the needs of others? These signs don't always appear immediately. Many narcissistic individuals are highly charismatic at first. They know exactly how to attract people. The challenge comes later, once admiration begins to fade. That's often when manipulation, blame, or emotional control begins to surface. Understanding these patterns doesn't mean judging people. It means protecting yourself from unnecessary emotional harm. Greene also encourages us to turn the spotlight inward. It's easy to recognize narcissism in others. It's much harder to recognize it in ourselves. The next time someone disagrees with you, notice your first reaction. Do you become defensive immediately? Do you feel personally attacked? Do you spend more energy protecting your ego than understanding the other person's perspective? If so, your own narcissism may be speaking. Awareness changes everything. The moment you recognize your emotional need for validation, you regain the ability to respond differently. Instead of defending yourself automatically, you become curious. Instead of proving you're right, you begin asking questions. Instead of needing admiration, you start building genuine connection. Greene believes empathy is one of the strongest antidotes to excessive narcissism. Empathy shifts attention away from ourselves and toward the experiences of others. It allows us to understand people's fears, motivations, frustrations, and dreams. The more accurately you understand other people, the better you'll communicate. The stronger your relationships will become. And ironically, the more influence you'll naturally gain. People trust those who genuinely understand them, not those who constantly demand attention. When dealing with highly narcissistic individuals, Greene recommends strategy over confrontation. Arguing with them rarely changes anything. Attacking their ego usually makes them even more defensive. Instead, maintain clear boundaries. Stay emotionally balanced. Avoid getting pulled into unnecessary power struggles. Sometimes allowing them a small victory protects you from a much larger conflict. That isn't weakness. It's emotional intelligence. Ultimately, the law of narcissism teaches us something surprisingly hopeful. Every person desires significance. Every person wants to feel valued. The difference lies in where that value comes from. If it depends entirely on the approval of others, we'll spend our lives chasing validation that never truly satisfies. But when confidence grows from self-awareness, purpose, and empathy, we no longer need constant recognition. We become secure enough to celebrate others instead of competing with them. We listen more, judge less, connect more deeply, and in doing so, we master one of the most powerful laws of human nature. In the next chapter, we'll explore another fascinating aspect of human behavior, the masks we wear every single day. Chapter 3, the Law of Role-Playing. Now that we've explored the emotional forces that shape our decisions and the hidden desire for validation that influences our relationships, it's time to examine another fascinating truth about human nature. Every single day, whether we realize it or not, we perform. We adjust the way we speak. We change our expressions. We soften certain opinions. We emphasize others. In different situations, we naturally present different versions of ourselves. Around family, we behave one way. Around close friends, another. At work, we often become more professional, more careful, and more controlled. None of this is unusual. In fact, Robert Greene argues that role-playing is one of the most natural behaviors human beings possess. From childhood, we begin learning which behaviors earn approval, which attract attention, and which help us avoid rejection. Without even realizing it, we start creating social masks. These masks allow us to fit into different environments, build relationships, and cooperate with others. In many ways, they're essential. Imagine speaking to your closest friend exactly the same way you would address your employer, or treating a formal business meeting like a casual family dinner. Life simply doesn't work that way. Different situations demand different versions of ourselves. The problem isn't wearing a mask. The problem begins when we forget there's a mask at all. Some people become so attached to the image they've created that they lose touch with who they really are. They spend so much energy maintaining appearances that authenticity slowly disappears beneath the performance. Over time, this creates a quiet inner conflict. Outwardly, everything may appear successful. People admire them, respect them, even envy them. Yet internally, they feel exhausted, because constantly pretending to be someone you're not requires enormous emotional energy. Greene reminds us that the most influential people understand something important. They know how to adapt without losing themselves. That balance is rare and incredibly powerful. Take a moment to think about someone you've met who seemed instantly genuine. There was no obvious performance, no desperate attempt to impress, no forced confidence. They simply seemed comfortable in their own skin. Ironically, those people often leave the strongest impression. Why? Because authenticity creates trust. People naturally gravitate toward those whose words, actions, and emotions feel aligned. That doesn't mean they're completely transparent. Everyone keeps certain thoughts private. Everyone adjusts their behavior depending on the situation. The difference is that their public image remains connected to their real character. Greene encourages us to become students of human behavior. Instead of focusing only on what people say, pay attention to how they present themselves. Notice how their personality changes depending on who's in the room. Observe how they speak to people with power, compared to those who have nothing to offer them. Watch how they react when attention shifts away from them. These subtle changes often reveal far more than words ever could. At the same time, turn that same observation inward. Ask yourself, what roles do I play every day? Which version of myself feels the most natural? And which one exists only because I'm afraid of being judged? Those questions aren't meant to create insecurity. They're meant to increase awareness, because awareness allows you to choose your role, instead of becoming trapped inside one. Greene also emphasizes the importance of adaptability. Life constantly changes. New environments demand new skills. New relationships require different forms of communication. The people who succeed aren't always the smartest. They're often the ones who adapt the fastest without compromising their values. Think of a skilled leader. They don't speak to every employee exactly the same way. They understand personalities. They adjust their communication. They know when to encourage, when to challenge, and when to simply listen. They're not being fake. They're being effective. The same principle applies to every relationship. The better you understand the emotional needs of others, the easier it becomes to communicate in ways that build trust instead of resistance. This is one reason emotionally intelligent people often appear naturally charismatic. They're not trying to dominate every interaction. They're paying attention. They're reading the room. They're responding instead of reacting. However, Greene offers an important warning. Never allow your desire to impress others to become stronger than your commitment to your own character. Reputation can open doors, but character determines what happens after those doors open. If your public image is built entirely on performance, eventually the truth catches up. People notice inconsistency. They sense manipulation, and trust begins to disappear. On the other hand, when your actions consistently match your values, your reputation grows naturally, not because you've created the perfect image, but because people know what to expect from you. That kind of credibility can't be manufactured. It has to be earned. The law of role-playing isn't encouraging deception. It's teaching awareness. Understand the roles you naturally play. Recognize the masks you wear. Adapt when necessary. But never become so committed to the performance that you forget the person behind it. Because real influence doesn't come from pretending to be someone extraordinary. It comes from understanding yourself well enough to bring the best version of who you already are into every situation. In the next chapter, we'll uncover another hidden force that quietly shapes our lives. The unconscious patterns that keep us repeating the same behaviors again and again. Chapter 4. The Law of Compulsive Behavior. As we continue exploring the hidden patterns that shape human nature, we arrive at another force that's often invisible, yet incredibly powerful. It's the force behind habits we can't seem to break, relationships we keep repeating, and decisions we continue making even when we know they aren't good for us. Robert Greene calls this the law of compulsive behavior. Have you ever caught yourself asking, why do I keep doing this? Maybe you've promised yourself you'd stop procrastinating, yet somehow deadlines always seem to arrive before you begin. Perhaps you found yourself attracted to the same kind of unhealthy relationships over and over again. Or maybe you react to criticism in exactly the same way every single time, even though you know it only makes the situation worse. These aren't random accidents. According to Greene, they're patterns. Patterns created long before we become aware of them. Many of our strongest behaviors aren't conscious choices. They're automatic responses shaped by years of emotional conditioning. In many cases, that conditioning begins in childhood. The experiences we have early in life quietly teach us how to respond to fear, stress, rejection, and uncertainty. A child who grows up in a chaotic environment may become obsessed with control as an adult. Someone who constantly had to earn love through achievement may grow into a perfectionist who never feels satisfied. Another person who rarely received emotional support may spend years desperately seeking approval from everyone around them. Different childhood experiences, different compulsions, but the same hidden process. Our past quietly programs many of our present behaviors. The challenge is that these patterns operate beneath our awareness. We don't wake up in the morning and decide to repeat them. They simply feel familiar. And what feels familiar often feels safe, even when it isn't healthy. Greene explains that one of the most common compulsive behaviors is the need for control. Some people try to manage every detail of every situation. They struggle to delegate. They become anxious when life feels unpredictable. To them, control creates the illusion of safety. Others become trapped by perfectionism. Nothing they accomplish ever feels good enough. Every project could be better. Every mistake feels unacceptable. Instead of enjoying progress, they become prisoners of impossible standards. Then there are those who constantly seek approval. Their mood depends entirely on how others respond to them. A compliment lifts them up. A small criticism brings them crashing down. Without realizing it, they've handed control of their emotional well-being to everyone around them. Some compulsions become even more destructive. People turn to shopping, alcohol, social media, work, or countless other distractions. Not because these things are inherently harmful, but because they temporarily silence emotions they don't know how to face. The relief feels real, but only for a moment. Soon the same discomfort returns, and the cycle begins again. This is why Greene believes awareness is the beginning of freedom. You can't change a pattern you refuse to recognize. The next time you find yourself reacting automatically, pause. Ask yourself, what am I really responding to? Is it the situation itself? Or is it an old emotional pattern quietly taking control? That simple question can reveal more than you might expect. Greene also encourages us to identify our emotional triggers. Every compulsion has one. For some people it's rejection. For others it's uncertainty, loneliness, failure, or feeling out of control. Once you recognize the trigger, you gain the opportunity to interrupt the pattern before it takes over. This is where mindfulness becomes incredibly valuable. Mindfulness isn't about emptying your mind, it's about observing it. Instead of becoming your thoughts, you learn to watch them. Instead of reacting immediately, you create space between emotion and action. That small space is where better decisions are born. Greene also reminds us that replacing a bad habit is far more effective than simply trying to eliminate it. Nature dislikes empty spaces. If you remove one behavior without replacing it, the old pattern usually returns. A healthier routine, a creative outlet, exercise, writing, meditation, or meaningful conversation can gradually replace destructive compulsions with habits that strengthen rather than weaken you. Sometimes, however, deeper wounds require deeper healing. There's no shame in asking for help, whether it's a trusted friend, a mentor, or a therapist. Outside guidance often helps us recognize blind spots we could never see alone. Even the strongest people need perspective. Breaking compulsive behavior doesn't happen overnight. These patterns were built over years. They won't disappear after one good decision. But every time you become aware, every time you choose differently, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen a new one. Slowly, almost invisibly, you begin rewriting the habits that once controlled your life. The law of compulsive behavior reminds us that lasting change doesn't begin with willpower alone. It begins with understanding. The more clearly you understand the hidden forces driving your behavior, the less control those forces have over you, because real freedom isn't doing whatever you feel like doing. Real freedom is no longer being controlled by patterns you never consciously chose. And once you begin breaking those invisible cycles, you don't just change your habits, you change the direction of your entire life. In the next chapter, we'll explore another powerful force that quietly influences human behavior, our tendency to desire what other people have. Chapter 5. The Law of Covetousness. Now that we've uncovered the hidden patterns that quietly drive our behavior, we arrive at another force that's just as powerful. A force that's responsible for countless rivalries, broken friendships, unhealthy competition, and the constant feeling that what we have is somehow not enough. Robert Greene calls this the Law of Covetousness. At its core, covetousness is the desire to possess what belongs to someone else. It isn't limited to money or material possessions. We envy careers, relationships, status, talent, confidence, beauty, influence. Sometimes we even envy the happiness we imagine other people have. And often, we don't realize we're doing it. Think about the last time you saw someone achieve something you secretly wanted. Maybe they received the promotion you hoped for, built the business you dreamed about, found the relationship you wished you had, or simply seemed more successful than you. Your first reaction may have been admiration, but underneath that admiration, did you also feel disappointment, frustration, or the quiet thought, "Why them instead of me?" If so, you've experienced one of the most natural aspects of human psychology. Greene explains that human beings are constantly comparing themselves to others. Our minds naturally measure where we stand. Who's ahead? Who's behind? Who's gaining? Who's losing? In small doses, comparison can motivate us. It pushes us to improve, to learn, to grow. But when comparison turns into obsession, it becomes dangerous. Instead of appreciating our own progress, we become fixated on someone else's success. No matter what we achieve, it never feels enough, because someone will always appear richer, smarter, more attractive, or more accomplished. This endless comparison creates a life where satisfaction always remains just out of reach. Greene points out that envy rarely announces itself openly. Very few people admit they're envious. Instead, it hides behind criticism, sarcasm, dismissive comments, or quiet resentment. Someone else's success suddenly seems undeserved. Their achievements become luck. Their hard work is ignored, not because it's true, but because envy is searching for a way to protect the ego. This is why envy can quietly damage relationships. Friends become competitors. Colleagues become threats. Instead of celebrating another person's success, we begin looking for reasons to diminish it. The tragedy is that envy hurts the person feeling it far more than the person it's directed toward. While someone else continues building their life, the envious mind remains trapped, watching, comparing, resenting. Greene encourages us to recognize this emotional pattern before it begins controlling our decisions. The moment you notice yourself comparing your life to someone else's, pause. Ask yourself, what exactly am I envying? Is it their success, or the feeling you imagine their success gives them? Often, we aren't jealous of what people actually have. We're jealous of the story we've created about their lives. From the outside, everything looks perfect. But every person carries struggles that remain invisible. The successful entrepreneur also carries pressure. The confident speaker experiences doubt. The happy couple faces challenges no one else sees. Comparison only shows us the highlights, never the full picture. Greene reminds us that gratitude is one of the strongest antidotes to covetousness. When you regularly recognize what already exists in your life, your attention naturally shifts away from what you lack. Gratitude doesn't eliminate ambition. It simply prevents ambition from becoming driven by insecurity. There's another powerful shift Greene encourages. Turn envy into curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why do they have what I don't?" ask, "What can I learn from them?" That single change transforms jealousy into education. Successful people stop becoming threats. They become teachers. Their achievements become proof that something is possible, rather than evidence that you're falling behind. Greene also reminds us to define success on your own terms. Many people spend years chasing goals they never truly wanted, not because those goals matter to them, but because society rewards them. More money, more recognition, more status. Yet none of these guarantee fulfillment. Real success begins when your goals reflect your own values, not someone else's expectations. The more clearly you define what truly matters to you, the less power comparison holds over your mind. You'll spend less time watching other people's lives, and more time building your own. Ironically, that's often when real progress begins, because your energy is no longer divided by resentment. It's invested in growth. The law of covetousness reminds us that desire itself isn't the problem. Desire has built civilizations, inspired innovation, and pushed humanity forward. The danger begins when our desire becomes focused on someone else's life instead of our own path. Every moment spent comparing yourself to others is a moment stolen from becoming the person you're capable of becoming. So appreciate what you already have. Learn from those ahead of you. Celebrate the success of others without feeling diminished by it, because another person's victory never reduces your potential. Your journey has its own timing, its own challenges, and its own opportunities. The more completely you accept that truth, the more peacefully and confidently you'll move through life. In the next chapter, we'll explore another hidden weakness of human nature, our tendency to sacrifice the future for the comfort of the present. Chapter 6. The Law of Shortsightedness. As we've seen throughout this journey, many of our greatest struggles don't come from a lack of intelligence. They come from the way our minds naturally operate. And one of the most common mental traps we all fall into is sacrificing tomorrow for the comfort of today. Robert Greene calls this the law of short-sightedness. Human beings are naturally drawn toward immediate rewards. We want quick results, instant gratification, fast success. We'd rather enjoy a small reward today than wait patiently for something far greater tomorrow. It's a tendency that's deeply wired into our psychology. Thousands of years ago, this instinct helped our ancestors survive. Food wasn't guaranteed. Safety wasn't guaranteed. If an opportunity appeared, they had to seize it immediately. Thinking too far ahead could mean missing the chance to survive. But the modern world is very different. Today, the people who thrive are often the ones who can delay gratification, who can think years ahead instead of just hours ahead. Yet our brains are still programmed to chase what feels good right now. That's why saving money feels difficult. Why exercising consistently requires discipline. Why building meaningful relationships takes patience. And why so many people abandon long-term goals the moment progress slows down. The future is invisible. The present feels real. So naturally, the present wins. Think about how many life-changing decisions begin with one small moment of impatience. Someone quits learning a new skill because results aren't immediate. An investor panics during a temporary market decline and sells too early. A promising relationship ends because of one difficult conversation. A business owner gives up just before years of effort begin paying off. At the time, each decision feels reasonable. Only later does the cost become clear. Greene explains that short-sightedness often disguises itself as urgency. Everything suddenly feels like it needs an immediate response. A harsh comment demands an instant reply. A tempting opportunity seems too good to miss. A setback feels permanent. But in reality, very few decisions are as urgent as our emotions make them appear. The more emotional we become, the shorter our time horizon grows. We stop asking, where will this decision lead me in 5 years? Instead, we ask, How can I feel better right now? That subtle shift changes everything. Greene uses history to illustrate this lesson. Many powerful leaders achieved extraordinary success through vision and patience. Yet others destroyed everything because they became trapped by immediate victories. Napoleon Bonaparte is one example. His early military successes created enormous confidence. Each victory encouraged greater risks. Instead of thinking strategically about the future, he became consumed by short-term conquest. Eventually, those impulsive decisions led to one of history's most dramatic downfalls. His greatest enemy wasn't a stronger army. It was his inability to see beyond the next victory. This same pattern appears in everyday life. People stay in jobs they dislike because change feels uncomfortable today. They avoid difficult conversations because temporary peace feels easier than long-term honesty. They spend years postponing meaningful goals, waiting for the perfect time that never arrives. Without realizing it, they're allowing today's emotions to quietly steal tomorrow's opportunities. So how do we escape this trap? Greene begins with awareness. The next time you're faced with an important decision, pause. Instead of asking yourself, "What do I want right now?" ask, "What will my future self thank me for?" That single question instantly expands your perspective. It reminds you that today's choice doesn't exist in isolation. Every decision creates consequences that extend far beyond the present moment. Another powerful habit is learning the art of delayed gratification. This doesn't mean denying yourself happiness. It means choosing greater rewards over immediate comfort. Every meaningful achievement follows this principle. Great health comes from thousands of small choices. Strong relationships grow through consistent effort. Financial freedom develops through years of disciplined decisions. Mastery in any field is built one patient day at a time. None of these rewards happen overnight, but all of them become possible for those willing to think beyond the present. Greene also encourages us to regularly zoom out. When facing a problem, imagine looking at your life from 10 years in the future. Will today's setback still matter? Will this disagreement seem as important? Will this fear still deserve so much attention? Most of the time, the answer is no. That broader perspective helps emotions lose their grip. It becomes easier to respond wisely instead of reacting impulsively. Planning also plays an essential role. People often believe successful individuals simply make better decisions. In reality, many of them make fewer emotional decisions because they've already created long-term plans. Those plans act like a compass. When distractions appear, they know exactly where they're heading. Without a clear direction, every temptation looks appealing. Every shortcut feels convincing. Every opportunity becomes difficult to evaluate. But when your long-term vision is clear, saying no becomes much easier. The law of short-sightedness reminds us that every day we're quietly shaping the future we'll eventually live in. Small choices may seem insignificant in the moment, but repeated over months and years, they become the foundation of our lives. Your future isn't created by one dramatic decision. It's created by countless ordinary decisions made consistently over time. The question isn't whether your choices matter. The question is, what kind of future are today's choices creating? Because every patient decision, every disciplined action, and every moment you choose long-term growth over immediate comfort brings you one step closer to becoming the person you truly want to be. In the next chapter, we'll explore another powerful aspect of human nature: why people become defensive, and how understanding that instinct can completely transform the way you communicate with others. Chapter 7. The Law of Defensiveness. As we've discovered throughout these chapters, people rarely respond only to what's happening in front of them. More often, they respond to what they feel. And few emotions are more powerful than the feeling of being threatened, whether it's criticism, rejection, embarrassment, or simply the fear of being misunderstood. Our first instinct is often the same. We become defensive. Robert Greene calls this the Law of Defensiveness. Defensiveness is one of the most natural human reactions. When someone questions our decisions, challenges our beliefs, or points out our mistakes, it can feel less like feedback and more like an attack on who we are. Without realizing it, we stop listening. Instead of trying to understand, we begin trying to protect ourselves. Greene explains that defensiveness isn't usually caused by confidence. It's caused by insecurity. The stronger our emotional attachment to our identity, the harder it becomes to accept anything that threatens it. That's why two people can receive the exact same criticism, yet respond in completely different ways. One person listens calmly and considers the feedback. The other becomes angry, makes excuses, or immediately shifts the blame. The difference isn't intelligence. It's emotional security. Think about the last time someone corrected you. What was your first reaction? Did you become curious, or did you immediately begin explaining why you weren't at fault? Most of us instinctively defend ourselves before we've even finished hearing the other person. Our ego quietly steps in, trying to protect the image we've built of ourselves. Greene reminds us that this happens to everyone. No one enjoys feeling wrong. No one enjoys admitting mistakes. But the people who grow the fastest are usually the ones who become less concerned with protecting their ego and more interested in discovering the truth. Defensiveness can appear in many forms. Sometimes it's obvious. Someone raises their voice, becomes argumentative, or refuses to accept responsibility. Other times, it's much more subtle. A person changes the subject, makes a joke, becomes unusually quiet, rationalizes every decision, or blames circumstances instead of themselves. Different behaviors, the same underlying purpose, protecting the ego from discomfort. Greene encourages us to become observers of these patterns. Watch how people respond when they're challenged. Notice changes in their tone of voice, their facial expressions, their body language. Do they become tense, cross their arms, interrupt more often, or suddenly begin justifying everything they say? These small signals often reveal that emotions have taken control. Recognizing defensiveness in others is valuable, but recognizing it in yourself is even more important. The next time you feel the urge to defend yourself, pause, take a slow breath, and ask yourself, am I protecting the truth or protecting my ego? That single question can completely change the direction of a conversation. Greene also explains that the way we deliver feedback matters just as much as the feedback itself. People are far more open to criticism when they feel respected. If someone feels attacked, their mind immediately closes. They stop processing your message and start preparing their defense. This is why empathy is such a powerful communication skill. Before correcting someone, try understanding their perspective. Acknowledge their effort. Choose your words carefully. When people feel understood, they're much more willing to understand you. Another helpful strategy is asking questions instead of making accusations. Rather than saying, "You handled this badly," you might ask, "What do you think could have been done differently?" Questions invite reflection. Accusations invite resistance. That small shift often leads to far more productive conversations. Greene also reminds us that not every disagreement deserves an immediate response. Sometimes emotions are simply too intense. In those moments, stepping away isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom. Allow emotions to settle. return when both people are ready to listen instead of react. Many conflicts disappear once emotional intensity fades. This principle applies to every area of life. At work, defensiveness can damage teamwork and prevent honest communication. In friendships, it creates distance where trust once existed. In families, it turns simple misunderstandings into lasting resentment. And in romantic relationships, it often becomes one of the biggest obstacles to intimacy. When both people focus only on defending themselves, no one truly feels heard. But when even one person chooses curiosity over pride, the entire conversation begins to change. Greene believes emotional maturity isn't measured by how often you're right. It's measured by how willing you are to examine yourself. The strongest people aren't those who never receive criticism. They're the ones who can hear difficult truths, learn from them, and continue moving forward without allowing their ego to stand in the way. The law of defensiveness teaches us that our greatest obstacle is often not other people, but our own need to protect the image we've created of ourselves. The moment we become less afraid of being wrong, we become far more capable of becoming better. Because every piece of honest feedback, even when it's uncomfortable, contains an opportunity to grow. And those who learn to lower their defenses often discover that the greatest personal breakthroughs begin on the other side of humility. In the next chapter, we'll explore another hidden force that quietly holds people back: the unconscious habit of becoming our own greatest obstacle through self-sabotage. Chapter 8. The Law of Self-Sabotage. As we continue uncovering the hidden forces that shape our lives, we arrive at one of the most frustrating aspects of human nature: the strange tendency to become our own greatest obstacle. Have you ever worked towards something you genuinely wanted, only to somehow ruin your own progress? Maybe you delayed an important opportunity until it disappeared. Perhaps you walked away from a healthy relationship because it felt unfamiliar. Or maybe you doubted yourself so often that you never even gave your dreams a real chance. If any of that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Robert Greene calls this the law of self-sabotage. Self-sabotage happens when our unconscious fears quietly work against our conscious goals. On the surface, we say we want success, confidence, love, growth. But beneath the surface, old beliefs, hidden fears, and unresolved emotions begin pulling us in the opposite direction. The result is a constant battle between what we want and what we secretly believe we deserve. Greene explains that these patterns rarely appear overnight. They often begin very early in life. A child who grows up hearing constant criticism may eventually believe they're never good enough. Another, who experiences repeated rejection, may begin expecting disappointment before it even happens. Someone who is punished for standing out may eventually learn that success feels dangerous. Years later, those beliefs continue operating in the background, not because they're true, but because they feel familiar. This is why self-sabotage can be so difficult to recognize. We don't consciously decide to hold ourselves back. Instead, we create excuses that seem perfectly reasonable. I'll start next week. I'm not ready yet. Someone else could do it better. Over time, those excuses become habits, and those habits quietly shape the direction of our lives. Greene identifies several common forms of self-sabotage. One of the most obvious is procrastination. People often assume procrastination is caused by laziness, but in many cases, it's caused by fear. Fear of failure, fear of success, fear of being judged. Delaying the task temporarily protects us from those uncomfortable emotions, but it also delays the life we're trying to build. Another common pattern is perfectionism. At first glance, Perfectionism seems like a strength. It looks like high standards, attention to detail, a commitment to excellence. But underneath, it often hides a fear of making mistakes. When nothing ever feels good enough, nothing ever gets finished. Progress is sacrificed in the pursuit of perfection. Negative self-talk is another powerful form of self-sabotage. Listen closely to your inner voice. Does it encourage you, or constantly remind you of your weaknesses? Many people speak to themselves in ways they'd never speak to someone they love. They replay old failures, magnify small mistakes, and ignore their own progress. Eventually, those thoughts become beliefs, and beliefs shape behavior. Greene reminds us that our minds naturally look for evidence to support what we already believe. If you believe you're destined to fail, you'll unconsciously notice every setback. If you believe you're capable of growth, you'll begin noticing opportunities instead. Your mindset becomes the filter through which you experience reality. So how do we break free from self-sabotage? The first step is awareness. Pay attention to the moments when you repeatedly get in your own way. Ask yourself, what am I actually afraid of? Often, the answer has very little to do with the situation itself. It's connected to an old fear that's been following you for years. Greene also encourages us to challenge the stories we tell ourselves. Just because a thought appears in your mind doesn't mean it's true. Thoughts are not facts. They're interpretations. And interpretations can change. Another powerful strategy is setting realistic goals. When a challenge feels overwhelming, break it into smaller steps. Small victories build confidence. Confidence creates momentum. And momentum gradually replaces fear with action. Surrounding yourself with supportive people also makes a tremendous difference. The people around you influence the beliefs you develop about yourself. Encouragement inspires courage. Constructive feedback promotes growth. Healthy relationships remind you of strengths you've forgotten. Greene also emphasizes the importance of self-compassion. Growth doesn't happen through constant self-criticism. It happens through honest reflection combined with patience. Every mistake becomes a lesson. Every setback becomes information. Every challenge becomes another opportunity to improve. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is progress. Little by little, the patterns that once controlled you begin losing their power. Each time you act despite fear, you weaken the old belief. Each time you keep a promise to yourself, you build trust in your own abilities. Eventually, the person standing in your way is no longer yourself. The law of self-sabotage reminds us that the greatest barriers in life are often invisible. They're the fears, the doubts, and the limiting beliefs we've carried for years without questioning them. But once those hidden patterns are brought into the light, they begin to lose their control. Because lasting success isn't about defeating other people. It's about no longer allowing your unconscious mind to defeat you. And when you finally stop working against yourself, you discover just how much you've been capable of all along. In the next chapter, we'll explore another fascinating aspect of human nature. Why every generation sees the world differently, and how understanding those differences can help us communicate, collaborate, and lead more effectively. Chapter 9. The Law of Generational Myopia. Every generation believes it sees the world more clearly than the one before it. Older generations often believe younger people have become impatient, entitled, or disconnected from traditional values. Younger generations often see older people as outdated, resistant to change, or unwilling to understand a rapidly evolving world. The result is a cycle that has repeated throughout history. Each generation struggles to understand the one that came before, and the one that follows. Robert Greene calls this the law of generational myopia. Generational myopia is the tendency to view the world only through the experiences of your own generation. We naturally assume that the conditions we grew up with represent the normal way life should be, but every generation is shaped by different circumstances. Wars, economic conditions, technology, politics, culture, education. These experiences quietly shape how people think, what they value, and how they respond to change. Someone raised during economic hardship often develops a deep appreciation for stability and financial security. Someone who grows up during rapid technological innovation may naturally embrace change and experimentation. Neither perspective is completely right. Neither is completely wrong. They're simply products of different environments. Greene explains that every generation solves the problems of its own time, but in doing so, it also develops blind spots. Older generations may underestimate the value of new ideas because those ideas challenge familiar ways of thinking. Younger generations may dismiss traditional wisdom because it appears outdated. Both sides risk overlooking valuable lessons. History shows this pattern again and again. When automobiles first appeared, many believed they would never replace horses. When computers entered homes, some dismissed them as passing trends. The internet, smartphones, artificial intelligence. Nearly every major innovation has been greeted with both excitement and resistance. Change always creates discomfort, not because change is inherently bad, but because it challenges certainty. Greene reminds us that every generation believes its challenges are unique. In reality, human nature changes far less than technology does. The tools may evolve. The environment may shift. But people continue struggling with ambition, fear, love, status, competition, and the desire for meaning. The surface changes. The underlying psychology remains remarkably consistent. Generational myopia often becomes most visible in the workplace. Different generations may approach work in completely different ways. One values loyalty and long-term commitment. Another values flexibility and purpose. One prefers face-to-face conversations. Another communicates effortlessly through technology. Without understanding these differences, simple misunderstandings quickly become unnecessary conflicts. The same thing happens inside families. Parents sometimes struggle to understand the choices their children make. Children often feel their parents don't understand the modern world. Both sides become frustrated, not because they lack intelligence, but because they're interpreting life through different experiences. Greene encourages us to replace judgment with curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why do they think like that?" ask, "What experiences shaped that belief?" That simple shift changes everything. It moves the conversation away from blame and toward understanding. Another important lesson is learning from every generation. Older people possess experience earned through decades of success and failure. Younger people often bring fresh perspectives, creativity, and the willingness to challenge outdated assumptions. When these strengths come together, innovation becomes possible. But when each side dismisses the other, everyone loses. Greene also reminds us to question our own assumptions. Many of our strongest opinions aren't objective truths. They're habits of thought inherited from the era in which we were raised, the music we prefer, the way we communicate, our beliefs about work, success, relationships, even leadership. Much of it reflects the world we grew up in. Recognizing this makes us more adaptable. Instead of defending every old belief, we become willing to examine it. Some traditions deserve to be preserved. Others deserve to evolve. Wisdom lies in knowing the difference. Adaptability has always been one of humanity's greatest strengths. The people who thrive aren't necessarily the strongest or the smartest. They're often the ones most willing to learn. Every generation has something valuable to teach. Every generation also has something valuable to learn. The law of generational myopia reminds us that progress happens when experience and innovation work together, not when they compete against each other. The more willing we are to understand perspectives different from our own, the better equipped we become to lead, to communicate, and to build stronger relationships across every stage of life. Because the goal isn't to prove that your generation is right. The goal is to recognize that every generation sees only part of the picture, and the broader your perspective becomes, the wiser your decisions will be. In the next chapter, we'll explore one of the most universal fears in human nature, the fear of uncertainty, and why learning to embrace the unknown is one of the greatest advantages you can develop. And that brings us to the end of our journey through The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. We've explored the hidden forces behind our emotions, our habits, our relationships, and the unconscious patterns that shape nearly every decision we make. The greatest lesson from this book is that human nature isn't something to fear. It's something to understand. Because the better you understand yourself, the better you'll understand everyone around you. And that's where real influence, better relationships, and lasting personal growth begin. Remember, every great transformation starts with self-awareness. Not overnight, but one insight, one decision, and one small improvement at a time. If you enjoyed this book summary and found it valuable, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the world's most powerful books. Also, let us know in the comments, which book should we summarize next? Your suggestions help shape future videos, and we'd love to hear what you'd like us to cover. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep mastering the fascinating nature of being human.